Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our office hour webinar. We'll get started in a few moments. Let people join for the next 4 or 5 minutes. But like always, if you will drop in the question box where you're joining us from, we'd love to see where everyone's joining from. You can access the question box in your control panel and then simply type in the box and then you can send the question. So I am joining from Oklahoma. I'm in town this week, right in the center of the country. Let's see where some of the others are joining from. We have Gary from East Idaho. Welcome, glad you're here. Ron in Hawaii, welcome. Let's see, Tim is joining us from California. So it seems like we have a lot of the West Coast showing up right now, probably during lunchtime. Karen from Kansas, welcome. You're just north of me, probably a few hours. Great to see you. Brandy is joining from Mississippi. Thanks for joining us. Now it looks like we're getting more of the central and eastern folks joining us. If you're just jumping on, find that question box in the control panel. Share with us where you're joining from. So far, we have Idaho, Hawaii, California, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee. Welcome. Connor in New Orleans. Welcome. I was just in New Orleans for Easter weekend. It was nice and humid. I liked it. Daniel from Nebraska. Welcome. So glad y'all took some time to join us today. Like always, this is going to be kind of a fast and furious 30 minutes. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. If you're just jumping on, we have a few people joining us. Feel free to open that question box, share with us where you're joining from. Also, as always, don't forget to get your trusty smartphone where you can scan some QR codes. We'll have some chances to collaborate today. So make sure you have a smartphone ready to go or tablet. Teresa from Connecticut, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Jeffrey's joining us from Utah. Welcome. Glad you're here. Guy from North Dakota, welcome. So glad y'all joined us today. This is going to be a fun 30 minutes. Lots of interactive conversations to be had. So get ready. We'll get started in about 3 minutes. There's quite a few people joining right now. If you're just jumping on, share with us in the question box where you're joining from. So far, we have people from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast, from north to south, all the states in between. It's always fun to see where people join from. We'll give them just a couple more minutes. If you're just joining, find the question box in that control panel. Share with us where you're joining us from. We'll get started in just a few moments. We have Jack joining from California. Welcome. Vicky from Alabama. Welcome. So glad y'all are here. I feel like we have California represented well. West Coast is represented well today, probably during your lunchtime. These are always tricky to plan because we're all in different time zones. Looks like we have a few more people joining us. We have Beth from Northwest Minnesota by the Canadian border. Welcome. And don't worry if you're not able to participate. You can receive the recording with the email you registered with the event for, and then watch it at a later time. That's better for you. We'll get started in about 1 minute. If you're just joining us, share with us where you're joining from. We have people from all around the United States joining us today. Thanks for taking time to join us on this quick 30-minute professional development webinar. We have Marcy joining us from North Alabama. Welcome. Glad you're here. I'm seeing some new names on our attendee list that I haven't seen before, so we're glad you're here. So with that, I am going to say a welcome to Improving Instruction Through Effective Feedback. This is a very quick 30-minute professional development webinar. And if you've never attended one of these before, get ready. These are highly interactive and collaborative sessions where we learn with and from each other. Also, grab your trusty smartphone because we'll be scanning QR codes so that we can learn with and from each other as well. And with that, here we go. You know I like to get it started off from the get-go. So here's my question for you today. What is feedback? If you were to have to create your own definition of feedback, what would you write? So share with us your definition of feedback by scanning that QR code using the camera app on your smartphone or tablet. It'll take you to what's called Mentimeter. As always, I'm using the free version of this ed tech tool, but check with your organizational's IT department to make sure you can use it with your students and on your network. Once you're there, you'll find a box. Type your definition in the box and hit submit. And then let's see how everyone has defined feedback today. I'm going to jump on over into there. We'll give it just a second. So what's great about Mentimeter is we can see each other's responses so that we can learn with and from each other. So far, we have a couple of definitions coming in. Some define feedback as something that will help someone else do something better, a formative assessment based upon training criteria, it's constructive, an effective criticism towards an instructor from the perspective of the student, interaction for improvement. Feedback is the listener communicating back with me how they understood me, absolutely. Feedback is engagement in how students are doing. Feedback could be information you give to or receive from another person. It could be your student remarks. Feedback could help someone do better, an improvement, absolutely. Feedback is a form of assessment of work or that helps performed, absolutely. What's funny is we have done this office hour webinar before in the fall, and I revamped a few parts of it. And as I was revamping them, of course, I had to use the new Chat GPT function to see how it would define classroom feedback. And it pulled many of the same things that we're going to talk about today. So as you can see, we're starting to build a collective definition of what feedback is. So you're seeing common themes from the participants on today's webinar. You're seeing things about improvements. We're seeing things about feedback, how it's constructive, how it's information, how it's looking at how work is performed, helping someone do better, improvement. So we're starting to pull some common themes together for our definition of feedback. So let's jump back into our slide deck. So what are we going to do today? We're going to define feedback, which we just started doing. We're going to look at a little research about feedback, and then we're going to kind of figure out 3 things that we can do to provide feedback for our students or learners. So my name is Mandy Green. I am a content specialist with Goodheart-Willcox. Like you, I've been a classroom teacher. I've worked in instructional technology, career and technical education, and my favorite thing to do is professional development and talk about instructional practices. So you'll get a few instructional strategy tips along the way as well as we talk about feedback. Let's keep going. All right, this may be one of those few webinars where I talk more than others, because let's look at some research. So we're going to look at John Hattie's research first. He has identified feedback as one of the top 10 influences on student achievement. And he's been focused on this for quite some time. Now, if you're familiar with his research, he has identified the average effect size of any educational influence as 0.4. Did you know that feedback has a 0.7 effect size? So we can almost double the effects on student achievement by using feedback. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what this feedback is. You know, giving is not always receiving. A lot of us as teachers and instructors claim that we give feedback, and we are trying to give the best feedback possible. But sometimes the more appropriate measure is the nature of the feedback and how it's received. Sometimes people aren't ready to hear the feedback. Also, the culture of our students can influence feedback's effects, right? Feedback is not only given differently, but it's received differently. Also thinking about how when feedback is provided, sometimes it provides discomfort, but in that discomfort, there can be the chance for greater change, provided it's accepted. Also, we need to think about how errors need to be welcomed. Sometimes that failing forward or failing first kind of concept, that when we're exposed to these errors in a safe environment, it can actually lead to higher performance. Whoops, I don't know what happened there. Also think about the power of our peers. What would happen if we started to have our students provide peer feedback? And we're going to talk about that for just a second towards the end. Also, this was mentioned earlier. What about feedback as a form of assessment? What would that look like? Let's dive a little bit more into some feedback. So, why should we even use feedback, right? So we know that it can double student learning or student achievement, but why should we use this in our classroom? So once again, you're going to grab your smartphone. You can scan that QR code. It will take you to a Padlet. Now on this Padlet, there are 3 columns, but we're only going to focus on the first 2. So don't worry about filling out that last column yet. So when you scan the QR code, you'll find a Padlet that has 3 columns. It's kind of a 3-2-1 activity. This QR code goes to the same place. In that first column, you're going to click the plus sign, and you're going to add 3 reasons why we should use feedback in our classroom. Right? It's professional development. There's no right or wrong answers. Then in the second column, click the plus sign, and you're going to add 2 reasons why someone might not use feedback in their classroom, right? So we know we should be using feedback, but what happens if we don't use feedback? Why not? I'm going to jump into that Padlet. That's once again, I'm using the free version of Padlet. It's an ed tech tool. My normal disclaimer, always check with your organization's IT department to make sure you can use it with students and that you can use it on your network. So let's jump into this Padlet to look at 3 reasons why we should be using feedback in our classroom and 2 reasons why someone might not want to use feedback in their classroom. You ready? Okay, let's check out our results so far. Realizing that this will take some time. I don't expect them to populate instantly. All right, so 3 reasons why we might consider using feedback in our classroom. Well, to improve the program as a whole, to better themselves on a personal level, absolutely. To help support improvements, yep. To improve instruction, check on how engagement's going, maybe change the curriculum, absolutely. Success metrics are reasons that we could use feedback. Students are aware of their grades. They help create a sense of community so students know you care, absolutely. The process of obtaining information about student learning and experience, yeah, that's why we would use feedback. Growth, to check for learning, to help students understand where they went wrong, absolutely. Understand where they went right, help them understand how they can improve. Those are all reasons we would use feedback in the classroom. Now, what are 2 reasons that we might not use feedback in the classroom? So we're not sure how to use it correctly, absolutely. Scared of what to say, absolutely. Like, do you just use that radical candor and say it out loud? Do you do that compliment sandwich? There's so many ways to give feedback that we've heard. What's working best? We might not use feedback because we're afraid we're going to offend someone. It's time consuming, right? If it's not built into our natural routine of teaching, where do we add it? We're already stretched for time most of the time. It's not constructive, not prepared for the criticism, takes time, not always well received. Exactly. So these are 2 reasons why someone might not be using feedback in their classroom. Are you picking up some themes, right? So now the 2 reasons we might not be, we're hearing some about fear, time consuming, some major topics coming through. And then the 3 reasons why we should use feedback seem to deal with engagement, assessing student learning, or some major themes that we're seeing there. We'll come back to this column at the end, so not yet. So I'm so glad you took time to type in the 3 reasons why and the 3 reasons why someone might not be using it. Now we're going to take this information and we're going to take it one step further. So let's look at some reasons about, some 7 essentials of feedback. So in our column of why we're not using it, time came up a lot. time is one of those essentials of feedback. You're also seeing some other keywords that you've seen throughout so far with our definition and our reasons why and why not. Consistency, goal reference, actionable, are all words that have been mentioned in some sense. So let's look at these one by one. Goal reference. Effective feedback requires that a person has a goal. You have to take action to achieve that goal, and you receive goal-related information about your actions. It's goal reference. It's focused around that goal. Let's look at tangible or transparent. Any useful feedback system involves not only that clear goal, but also tangible results related to that goal. In addition to feedback from coaches or other observers, video and audio recordings can help us perceive things that we may not have perceived before. Have you ever recorded yourself teaching? That is the most weird experience. I'm being completely honest. First of all, my voice does not sound like that, like it sounds on the recording, right? But then I noticed a lot of nuances. And even when I watch back these webinars, I talk a lot with my hands, which comes across very awkwardly on camera sometimes, right? So you notice things, you notice catchphrases, like, do I say right? Do I say do I say like? You notice those catchphrases. So that's helping me then achieve my tangible result from my goal of being a better presenter. So sometimes using things like video and audio can help us be more cognizant of those tangible or transparent goals that we have for ourselves and what they look like. Actionable. Effective feedback is concrete, specific, and useful. It provides that actionable information for our targeted audience. Then, user-friendly. Too much feedback can actually be counterproductive, right? So our feedback is to help the performer or the audience or the learner become better. But maybe by focusing only on one or two key elements can help create the buzz that we need for that person to be successful in receiving the feedback. I also read one that said to make it very simple. Then, if we look at timely, in most cases, the sooner you get feedback, the better. I don't want to have to wait around for hours or days to figure out whether my students were attentive or whether they learned what they needed to learn. I need to know that information now in a timely manner to help me prepare my lesson or activity that's next. Thinking about timeliness, technology is one powerful tool that we can utilize. You can use parts of the power of computer-assisted learning that's unlimited, provides that timely feedback, and offers many opportunities to use it. Let's look at ongoing. We know that the best feedback is ongoing. And one of the reasons that we had seen repeatedly in the activity about 2 reasons people don't use feedback was because of the timeliness and that kind of ongoing consistent measure, right? So we can adjust our performance, our learning, depends on not only receiving the feedback, but also having the opportunity to use it. So when we receive the feedback, we have to have a chance to make those corrections, and our students do as well, so that we can use that information going forward. What makes an assessment and educational formative is not just the way that it precedes a summative assessment, but it's because we give our learners an opportunity to take that information, show us what they know, and then we can readjust instruction to reshape their learning to have a better outcome later on, because we provide that ongoing feedback through formative assessments. And then last is consistency, which we talked about in that last activity, being able to provide this consistent, ongoing type of feedback to help our learners. Now, let's take this further into our classroom. So what kind of implications does this have on our classroom and our learners? So once again, you're going to scan that QR code. Then you're going to see the 7 feedback essentials pop up. On this one, you're going to tap the word and 2 arrows will pop up so that you can move it up or down. So we're going to create a ranking. And you are going to rank which type of feedback you use the most often in your classroom at the top, and what type of feedback you use the least often or least frequently at the bottom. This is through Poll Everywhere. Don't forget, check with your organization IT department to make sure that you can use it with your students and on your network. And we're going to see what it looks like. Now, because this one's a little different than what we've done in the past, I will demo just a moment. So if tangible, if ongoing is my most frequent type of feedback in my class, I'm going to click on it, click the up arrow. If consistent is the least frequent type, and I will just move them until they're in the order that I want them in, and then I will hit submit. So what type of feedback do you use most frequently in your classroom? And remember, there's no right or wrong answer. We're simply learning with and from each other, because I bet the type that you use most frequently, someone else does as well. And the type that you use least frequently, someone else does too. So let's see where we're at. So as you can see, we have several types coming in, and this will constantly change as more results are added to the data. So which type do you use most in your classroom? Ongoing. Absolutely. Goal referenced. Now it's tied with consistent, user-friendly, timely, tangible, and actionables coming in at 7th. If you would like to explain your reasoning, feel free to open up that question box and explain why one is used more often than the other in your classroom, remembering that there's no right or wrong answer. So as you can see, it looks like it's kind of settled out. So ongoing feedback is used most consistently. I would love to hear how you provide that ongoing feedback. Goal reference is coming at 2nd. User-friendly at 3rd. Consistent feedback at 4th. Timely, tangible, and transparent at 6th. And actionable at 7th. And why might actionable be ranked last in this setting? Feel free to share with us. I'll read a few of the questions out of the question box, and then we'll keep going for the sake of time. One just popped in that says, I use all types of feedback. It depends on the time, location, type of feedback given, your students, etc. Absolutely, right? You've got to have that feedback that connects to your students. What do they need in that moment? Because what I also need in my auto shop is very different than what I'm going to need in an English class, or very different than how my students might receive it in a culinary arts class. Absolutely. So it looks like a lot of us are using all the types of feedback. It just depends on the time, location, the setting, etc. Yes, exactly. Thank you all for sharing and taking a moment. We're going to keep going. All right, another one just popped in that says, we are doing work with learning targets, and those are linked to goals. Yes, they are. So that is an area I most want to improve on right now. Awesome, thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's have a moment where we're just gonna take this information about feedback. So we're talking about varying feedback for our students, the time, the location, maybe what we're working on as an organization as a whole, such as learning targets. What would happen if we had our students provide peer feedback? Have you tried that before? How did it work for you? So thinking about how we can extend feedback, not just how we give it to students and students provide feedback to us, but how would they provide feedback to each other? You know, what would happen if they started out with an activity like we did today, where we said, what is feedback? Have students define what is feedback and what is not feedback. So there you're having answers, examples of and non-examples of feedback. Then maybe we could help our students provide peer feedback, because this is a learned skill. It's not something we innately know, by scaffolding that learning with feedback. So maybe have feedback cards that have certain phrases on them that we want our students to use, or even sentence stems. Then we could move into the second phase, where students provide feedback together. What would happen in your class if you had students watch a video of maybe a student wrapping some type of presentation on YouTube, and you had created a rubric? And then after you and their class watch the student provide this presentation by wrapping, or some cool presentation, right? They had a rubric, and you could have a class discussion about the type of feedback you were given based on that rubric. Then finally, have them move into something a little more independent. You know, feedback is not something we automatically know how to use, and so it's going to have to be a skill that's learned and practiced. What would happen if you use peer-to-peer feedback in your class? Just some points to ponder as we start to wrap up this session. I would love to dive more into peer-to-peer feedback, but we'll keep going for the sake of time. So earlier we talked about why we should use feedback in our classroom. We talked about reasons we might not be using feedback. And then we looked at the 7 essentials based on the ASCD research, the 7 essentials of feedback. Now, Let's return to that Padlet one last time to fill out the third column, which is one way that you can incorporate feedback into your classroom. So thinking about our definition that we co-created at the beginning with what is feedback, thinking about our 3 and our 2 in this 3-2-1 activity, and the 7 essentials, what is one way you want to incorporate feedback into your classroom? Scan that QR code, share with us in that Padlet on that last column of something that you might do in your classroom to include feedback. Let's look at it. So as I open it, this is when my students would say, wait for it, Miss Green, wait for it. All right, we have some coming in. So what are some ways that we want to incorporate feedback now after we've had 25 minutes to think about feedback in some different ways? To keep me grounded by knowing where my students are, yes. Bringing aside students every month to give them a professional development update, absolutely. One way that we're going to incorporate feedback to improve the educational environment in lesson plans, right? So I actually have a longer version of this presentation than I do for a full hour and a half. And in that presentation, we do go more in depth in the actual classroom application. But I also have 2 questions about asking, 1, how did you receive feedback today as a learner on this webinar or in this face-to-face presentation? And then 2, what were some missed opportunities where I could have provided feedback as a facilitator to you as a learner? And so taking this feedback, it helps us be more vulnerable, realizing that we're constantly learning. So I see everyone's here talking about improvement, learning from my own field experiences out in the field, provide feedback to students, improve instructional methods. Yes, so by being vulnerable as facilitators and asking for feedback from our students and maybe some missed opportunities can help us grow in our instructional methods and practices. Absolutely. Helping students be an owner in their learning while being a partner in the process. That's a very great way to phrase that. Yes, they own the learner. We're a partner in this process, right? The process of learning. Awesome. I think that's all that's coming in right now. We're going to keep jumping. We're going to jump right back. So hopefully with this 3-2-1, you have an opportunity to think about ways that we use feedback, why we might not be using feedback, and then you saw some goals of others that hopefully triggered or ignited or sparked some other ideas for you in your classroom. Let's talk about what we did. So if you're looking at instructional strategies, we started out with the chalk talk, which is where I just asked you to define feedback. We used that 3-2-1, and I kind of broke it up throughout the session. So it wasn't a 3-2-1 all together. We did part of it at the beginning and part of it at the end. We did a lot of polling. So I asked you to rank the feedback in your classroom that you use most frequently to most, or least frequently. We used some tech tools like Mentimeter, free ed tech tool. We use Poll Everywhere and Padlet. I always use the free versions. So always check with your organization to see if you can use them. Now the research from today, we did use the K20 Learn where we pulled some stuff for instructional strategies. I also used John Hattie's research on making thinking visible, the visible learning. Of course, John Dewey has all the basic educational research from his days. And then we pulled the article from ASCD. Now, in previous webinars, we keep getting asked more and more frequently with links to our resources. And guess what we've created for you today? So in the handout section that you'll notice on your control panel, that should be right underneath the questions, you will see handouts. And when you open that, there are 2 items linked in there for you today. The first one you'll see on the left of the screen is your certificate of attendance. This is a blank certificate of attendance. You can just add your name and hopefully submit it if you need CEUs or if you need proof that you attended today. That's there for you. Our newest and latest takeaway is called our key takeaways. So this is where you'll find just a reminder of some strategies that we used, our ed tech tools that we use, and you'll find links to our research. So if you want to look at that research any further or review it, you'll have it there. And you'll find information about our next office hour webinar, so that if you want to go ahead and sign up today for our next one, that's the first Tuesday of May, that's there for you as well too. So this time we talked about feedback. Next month, we're going to look at some of those digital breakouts, ways that we can incorporate more critical thinking skills in our classroom, but increase student engagement. So that will be next in 2 weeks on May 2nd at 2 p.m. Central Time. And with that, if you have any questions, we would love to answer questions. Don't forget to click on that handout section so that you can get your certificate of attendance and the handout. It's saying they won't print. You might have to download them to your computer, Brandy. Let me know how that works. To download them, and then you'll have that. And then if you have specific questions, always feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the screen. You can take a picture of that with your smartphone. You can save it. And hopefully today you had about 25 minutes of thinking about feedback and you gained some new insight, some new ideas as we learned with and from each other. So thank you for spending your 30 minutes with us today. Looks like you're going to get about 3 minutes back. And as always, if you want more PD, please feel free to email me. We have lots of options for you on our webpage as well. And I hope you have a super afternoon. I'll hang out for about another minute or so to make sure we get all questions answered. And Brandy, if you're still having issues, if you'll send me an email, we can get that resolved quickly for you. So have a great afternoon, and we'll see you on May 2nd to talk about digital breakouts, helping our students utilize critical thinking skills and increasing their engagement all at the same time. So have a great day. We'll see you soon.